The world of entertainment was still in mourning. The shocking death of Malcolm-Jamal Warner had left a gaping wound in the hearts of countless fans across the globe. But beyond the headlines, past the carefully crafted news reports, and beneath the quiet candlelight vigils, there existed one woman whose silence lingered painfully: Phylicia Rashad. Known to millions as Claire Huxtable from The Cosby Show, and more intimately known to Malcolm as a second mother, her voice had been notably absent in the days following his passing. And when it finally broke, the world was not ready for what came pouring out. It was something deeper, more raw, the weeping soul of a woman who had seen a boy become a man, who had embraced him as her own, and who had now lost him just as suddenly as the rest of the world. When Phylicia Rashad finally spoke, her words didn't land as headlines. They landed as echoes across generations. The matriarch of television's most beloved family had kept her grief tucked behind her eyes, away from cameras and microphones, for nearly 2 weeks. And then, quietly but powerfully, she opened her heart. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was more than just a former co-star.
To Phylicia, he was a son. A real one.
And when he drowned off the coast of Costa Rica on that fateful July day in 2025, something inside her collapsed, silently, invisibly, until now. This is the story of what she revealed. Please, watch until the very end. It was a quiet morning in early July when the entertainment world awoke to the devastating news. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, dead at 54, splashed across every media outlet. The actor, who had grown up before the eyes of millions as the lovable, introspective Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, had reportedly drowned while vacationing with his wife and daughter in Costa Rica. The news sent shockwaves across social media, television, and Hollywood itself. Celebrities, fans, and former colleagues posted tributes in disbelief. Many couldn't accept the truth: Malcolm was gone. And so suddenly. But in a sunlit brownstone tucked away in New York City, Phylicia Rashad sat motionless. Her phone rang relentlessly, vibrating with texts and missed calls, and yet she stared blankly at the screen. She had just read the message herself, a simple line that hit like thunder: Malcolm is gone. It took her a full hour to process the words.
She had always worried about him.
Not because he was reckless, he wasn't. But because she knew life was unpredictable. Especially for black men in America. But she had never imagined this.
A drowning?
A peaceful vacation turned tragic? Her first instinct wasn't to reach for the phone. It wasn't to cry or scream. It was to remember. Her mind instantly flashed back to the first day they met. It was the summer of 1984. NBC executives were preparing for the launch of what would soon become one of the most iconic television shows in American history, The Cosby Show. Producers were auditioning young actors for the role of Theo, the teenage son of Cliff and Claire Huxtable. Hundreds of boys had walked in and out of the casting office.
Some were polished. Some were promising. None had it.
Then, a 14-year-old boy from Jersey City walked in. He had a quiet confidence, expressive brown eyes, and a slow, deliberate smile. Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't just read the lines. He became Theo. He made everyone in the room pause. Including Phylicia Rashad. Phylicia was already cast as Claire. She sat in on the final screen tests, and as the story goes, she leaned over to Bill Cosby and whispered, "That's the one." From that day on, she and Malcolm shared something rare. There was a chemistry between them that extended beyond the camera. She could read his silences. He could finish her sentences. It didn't take long for their bond to solidify into something unspoken but deeply understood, a maternal connection. She wasn't just an on-screen mom. She became a real-life anchor in his life. "He was my son in every way except birth," Phylicia once told Oprah in a 2005 interview. "We had something that was God-given. Divine." Malcolm-Jamal Warner became a household name by the time he was 15. Millions watched him every week. His face was on posters, magazines, and merchandise. He went from being a regular kid to one of the most recognizable teenagers in America. And fame, as Phylicia often warned him, was both a gift and a trap. She remembered the long talks they had backstage. The ones where she would gently remind him to stay grounded, to keep his circle small, to never let the applause drown out his own heartbeat. Malcolm listened. Always. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't intoxicated by fame, he was careful with it. But even with his wisdom and maturity, the pressure weighed on him. Phylicia knew when he was struggling, even if he didn't say it. She could sense when he walked into a room if he'd had a hard day. That's the kind of bond they had. He didn't need to tell me he was hurting. "I knew it," she said quietly in her interview after his death. "I could see it in the way he blinked. In the way he sat. He never had to say it out loud." When The Cosby Show ended in 1992, Malcolm was 22 years old. Most child stars struggle to find their identity after such massive success. But not Malcolm. He transitioned gracefully.
He directed. He produced.
He made music. And through it all, Phylicia watched with quiet pride. But the industry wasn't always kind. He didn't get the roles he deserved.
He was often typecast.
And despite his immense talent, Hollywood didn't always know what to do with a black man who had grown up in America's living rooms but didn't want to play by its limited rules. Phylicia often served as his sounding board. He would call her late at night, sometimes just to vent. Sometimes to cry. Sometimes to ask for nothing at all, just to hear her voice. He never outgrew needing a mother, she said tearfully. That's what made Malcolm special. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. Especially with me. And when he had his daughter, his most precious gift, Phylicia was one of the first people he called. She remembered that day vividly. He said, "Mama Phylicia, I'm a father now."
And he cried.
He cried the way my own son did when he became a father. 11 days before the tragedy, Phylicia received a call from Malcolm. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a warm, familiar check-in. "Hey Mama, just wanted to hear your voice," he said. They talked for 20 minutes. He told her about the trip he was planning with his daughter, how excited she was to snorkel for the first time, how he had bought her a waterproof camera. He laughed a lot during that call. He sounded full of joy. I could hear the ocean in his voice, Phylicia recalled.
That's how happy he was.
They ended the call with, "I love you." That was always how they ended their calls. She didn't know it would be the last time she'd ever hear his voice. The headlines said it happened quickly, but grief never moves in fast motions. The day Malcolm-Jamal Warner slipped beneath the water's surface was as clear as it was incomprehensible. His daughter had screamed. Witnesses had seen him swimming out just a little farther, keeping an eye on her as she floated nearby. A strong current, invisible, silent and fatal, had wrapped itself around him like a noose. Surfers noticed Malcolm struggling in the water and rushed to help, but by the time they reached him, it was too late. Emergency responders were called.
CPR was performed.
But the ocean had already taken what it came for. His body was recovered about 20 minutes later, lifeless but intact. When Phylicia Rashad received the confirmation call, she collapsed into a chair without saying a word. She didn't cry immediately.
Not yet.
The tears would come, but only after her mind could accept the truth that the boy she had watched grow up, the man she had come to love as family, had died protecting the thing he loved most, his daughter. That he died in the water, watching over his child. It's poetic in the cruelest way, she later whispered in a private remembrance.
He died a father. A protector. A guardian.
Just like he lived. After the call, her house turned into a tomb of memory. Everything seemed too loud and too quiet at once. The ticking of the clock was unbearable. The sound of the wind outside scraped at her nerves. The phone didn't stop ringing, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. She wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Photographs lined her hallway. One in particular stopped her every time she passed it. A black and white shot from the late 1980s, Phylicia and Malcolm on set, his arm around her, both of them laughing between takes. She remembered that moment.
It wasn't staged.
It wasn't for the cameras.
It was real.
He had just told her a joke, something corny about his hair, and she had burst into laughter. The camera had caught it perfectly. "I kept walking past it," she later said. "Then finally, I just sat on the floor underneath it and cried for hours." It was in that silence, not the media silence, but the deep, aching, motherly silence, that Phylicia began to mourn in earnest. Not just for Malcolm, but for the future she had assumed they'd still have. For the birthdays, the catch-ups, the holiday texts, the new projects they'd never get to collaborate on. For the family she had lost, again. What made their relationship extraordinary wasn't just that they had worked together. It was how deeply their connection endured long after the cameras stopped rolling. He called her on birthdays, on bad days, and sometimes on random Wednesdays just to say, "I'm thinking about you." When Malcolm struggled with Hollywood's politics, the roles that never came, the projects that fell apart, the shadow of being typecast, it was Phylicia he called. "She had a way of listening that healed you," he once said in a podcast interview. Even if she didn't say anything, she'd just be there. That's what mothers do. Even when life took them to different cities and different rhythms, the emotional tether between them never frayed. Phylicia knew about his personal battles. About the heartbreaks he never shared publicly. About the pride he felt as a father. She celebrated his wins with a pride only a mother could understand. One of her favorite memories, she revealed later, was watching Malcolm direct episodes of Read Between the Lines, the BET series they both starred in for a time. Seeing him in that chair, behind the camera, calling the shots, lifting others up, it filled me with so much joy, she said. I remember thinking, my boy grew up. The world mourned loudly. Tributes came in from celebrities, politicians, fellow actors, and fans who had grown up with Malcolm-Jamal Warner on their screens. Former co-stars posted heartfelt memories. Legacy networks aired the Cosby Show marathons. Think pieces about Black fatherhood and representation in media-filled blogs and newspapers. But Phylicia Rashad said nothing. Not yet. People wondered why she remained silent. Reporters called her agent. Tabloids speculated whether she was too distraught to speak. But what no one understood was that this wasn't a publicity loss for her. It was a personal, intimate devastation. The world had lost a celebrity. She had lost a son. There are no words in the first days, she explained later. Only memories. And the sharp sting of each one. She didn't attend the first public memorial. Not because she didn't want to be there, but because she couldn't bear to hear Malcolm's name spoken in the past tense. The finality of death is cruel. But hearing it celebrated, memorialized, that's when it becomes real. And she wasn't ready for that. She lit a candle in her living room instead. She sat with his photo. She whispered prayers. She stayed still in her grief, letting it bloom fully without apology. I couldn't speak to the world, she said, because I was still trying to speak to him. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a glossy magazine interview. Phylicia Rashad chose to speak on her own terms, in her own way, quietly, reverently, with the gravity of a mother in mourning. It was a private event. Just close friends, former castmates, and family. A closed-door memorial held in New York, exactly 10 days after Malcolm's passing. That's when she finally stood. The room was silent when she walked to the podium. Dressed in a soft, dark blue that shimmered only slightly in the light, she looked both regal and shattered. For a few moments, she said nothing. She looked down at her notes, then up at the room. And then, softly but firmly, she began. When Malcolm was 14, he walked into my life with a backpack full of dreams and the biggest heart I'd ever seen in a child. He wasn't my son by blood. But God doesn't always choose blood when he chooses family. He was my son in every way that matters. She paused. There are things I never said out loud to him. Things I thought I'd have time for. I thought there would be more birthdays. More dinners. More stories. And now, all I can do is say them here to all of you. I was proud of him. Every single day. Even when he was struggling. Especially then. Her voice trembled then. He made me a better woman. A better mother. And now, the world feels dimmer. Because a light like Malcolm doesn't come around twice. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Her silence had been deafening. But her words were thunder. The next morning after the memorial, when the sun rose slowly over Manhattan, Phylicia Rashad slipped out of the public eye once again. The cameras were gone. The statements had been made. The media would speculate, analyze, dissect her words. But Phylicia had something more important to do, something the headlines would never report on. She was going to see his daughter. She didn't want to intrude. She waited quietly, respectfully. But Malcolm's family welcomed her without hesitation. They knew what she had meant to him. They knew he had spoken of her not as a co-star, not even as a mentor, but as the woman who mothered me through manhood. When she arrived, his daughter, barely a teenager, ran into her arms without hesitation. Phylicia held her tightly, pressing her cheek against the girl's braided hair, breathing in the grief, the confusion, the loss that was too large for any child to understand. She looks just like him, Phylicia whispered later. Same eyes. Same smile. Same stubborn strength. They sat together for hours that day. No cameras. No press. No recordings. Just stories. Laughter through tears. Reminiscing. A safe space where grief could breathe without being judged. She told his daughter how much Malcolm had loved her. How he talked about her every time they spoke. How he said that becoming a father was the greatest role of his life. She needed to know he didn't die as a man running from anything, Phylicia said afterward. He died facing it all, his love, his purpose, his role as a father. That's what I wanted her to carry. After that visit, Phylicia returned home with something she hadn't expected, a box. Malcolm's family had given her one of his storage containers filled with old photos, letters, and memorabilia. He would have wanted you to have this, his sister had told her. She didn't open it immediately. For days it sat on her piano bench, untouched. The idea of going through his belongings felt like tampering with something sacred. But eventually, on a rainy afternoon, she lifted the lid. The smell of old paper, leather, and faint cologne wafted out, the scent of history, of memory, of Malcolm. Inside were dozens of photos she had never seen. Candid shots from their early days on set. Photos of cast outings, birthday parties, table reads. Little mementos, a ticket stub from a jazz concert they once attended, a note he wrote to her on Mother's Day, to Mama PHY, for everything the world never saw you do for me. I love you. Her hands shook as she read it. The grief came in waves again, not loud, not dramatic, but like the tide that had taken him, slow, steady, inevitable. She began to create a wall of remembrance in her home. Not a shrine, but a gallery. A tribute to their journey. A timeline of love that spanned decades.
It helps, she said.
Having his memory exist in color, not just in pain. The days that followed were not easy. Every interview request that came in felt like a weight. She didn't want to talk about Malcolm for ratings. She didn't want to reduce their sacred bond to soundbites. And yet, she understood her responsibility. To honor him publicly. To remind the world that his life wasn't just a footnote in sitcom history, it was a legacy of dignity, growth, and quiet brilliance. She agreed to one interview, with a Black-led podcast focused on intergenerational mentorship and legacy in entertainment. It was the first and only media appearance she did after Malcolm's death. In the interview, she spoke softly, deliberately. Every word mattered. I've worked with many young people in this industry, she said.
But Malcolm listened.
Not just to advice, he listened to your spirit.
He paid attention.
He carried wisdom like it was weightless. That's rare. When asked what she wanted the world to remember about him, she didn't hesitate.
That he was kind. Not performative. Not public. Truly kind.
That he carried burdens most people never saw, and still smiled. That he lived a life worthy of being mourned deeply. That episode, released just days later, became one of the podcast's most streamed episodes of all time. But Phylicia didn't care about numbers. She cared about truth. She had spoken her truth.
And now, she could rest.
In the weeks after the memorial, the old Cosby Show cast members began reconnecting in a way they hadn't in years. Grief has a strange way of reuniting those who drifted. Phylicia spoke to Tempest Bledsoe, who played Vanessa. They shared stories, tears, and laughter. It still feels impossible, Tempest had said. Like he's just away for a bit and he'll walk through the door any minute. They talked about how kind Malcolm had always been. About how, even when he was in the middle of a tough shoot or tired from travel, he made time for everyone.
Crew members. Extras.
The young kids who visited the set. He always made them feel seen. Phylicia also had a quiet conversation with Bill Cosby, one she hasn't spoken about publicly, but which close friends say was filled with shared grief and reflection. They spoke not just as colleagues, one friend said, but as two people who watched a boy grow into a man before their eyes. They remembered the little things, how Malcolm used to always bring his own scripts filled with notes in blue ink, how he was never late, how he once skipped a big studio event just to attend his niece's school play. These weren't things that made headlines, but they were the pieces of Malcolm that mattered. You can't fake that kind of heart, Phylicia said. You either have it or you don't. And Malcolm had more than his share. A few weeks after the memorial, Phylicia Rashad found herself standing outside the gates of Silvercup Studios in Queens, New York, the very place where The Cosby Show had been filmed in its earliest seasons. She hadn't planned to visit. In fact, she had avoided that place for years. But grief has its own gravity. And that day, it pulled her back to where it all began. The studio had long since moved on. New shows now occupied those halls. The echoes of the Huxtables were no longer in the walls. But for Phylicia, as she stepped onto that old lot, it was as if the 1980s came flooding back all at once. She stood in the corner where the kitchen had once been, where she had laughed with Malcolm over cold coffee between scenes. She walked past the space where their dressing rooms used to be, remembering the notes he'd sometimes leave taped to her mirror. "You got this," Mama scribbled in his now familiar handwriting. It was like walking through a dream, she later described. But a dream where someone was missing from every frame. The staff, recognizing her, gave her space. No selfies. No whispers. Just quiet respect. In the dim studio light, she stood still, as if trying to hear his voice one last time. And maybe, just maybe, in that long silence, she did. Phylicia Rashad is not only an actress and a maternal figure to millions, she is a real mother. Her daughter, Condola Rashad, a brilliant actress in her own right, had watched the grief consume her mother in slow, invisible waves. And one evening, she finally called. "Mom," she said gently over the phone, "I know you're hurting. But I need to ask you something. What is it, baby?
Can you tell me who he was? The real Malcolm.
Not the Malcolm the world saw, but the Malcolm you knew. It was the first time in weeks that Phylicia allowed herself to go deeper. She talked for over 2 hours. Told Condola about Malcolm's gentleness, how he handled fame with grace, how he once stood up to a director who spoke harshly to a background actor, refusing to work until the man apologized. She told her about how Malcolm would arrive early just to rehearse scenes, not because he had to, but because he didn't want to let anyone down. And she shared a story no one else knew, about the time Malcolm found out a crew member's son was sick and quietly paid their medical bills without ever telling anyone. "That's the man I lost," Phylicia said softly, tears running down her cheeks as she cradled the phone. "That's the son the world never got to fully see." One night, around 3 in the morning, Phylicia sat at her writing desk with nothing but a single lamp glowing beside her. The city outside was silent. She picked up a pen and a fresh sheet of paper and began to write a letter she knew she would never send.
"Dear Malcolm," it began. She poured out everything. The pride. The heartbreak. The gratitude. The unsaid words. She wrote about how much she admired the father he had become, how beautiful his love for his daughter was. She wrote about the last phone call and how he sounded like sunlight. She confessed her regrets, the conversations they never finished, the hugs she assumed she had more time to give. She wrote about how lonely the world felt now, how her mornings didn't start with his texts anymore, how even music felt emptier without him sending her jazz recommendations every week. Then, near the end of the letter, she wrote something she had only whispered in prayer before. "If I could have traded places with you, I would have. But maybe heaven needed you more than we did." When she finished, she folded the letter neatly, tied it with a small ribbon, and placed it in her memory box. The same box that now held his photo, that old backstage note, and the program from his memorial. She didn't need the world to read it. She just needed to say it. Phylicia Rashad released one final public statement. It was a letter. It read, "To those who loved him, I want to thank you for mourning him with me. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was a son to me in ways that cannot be measured by credits or contracts or camera time. He was light. He was grace. He was the kind of man we hope our sons become and our daughters meet. I have never known someone to carry fame so humbly, pain so quietly, and joy so generously. His laughter still echoes in my home. His wisdom still lingers in my ears. And his love, most of all, remains stitched into the very fabric of who I am. We shared years. We shared moments. We shared silence. We shared the kind of bond that defies explanation. And though the world may move on, I will not let him fade. Not in my heart. Not in my voice. Not in the work I do from this day forward. The Warner Rashad Legacy Initiative will continue in his honor. Because love must do more than grieve. It must grow. To his daughter, you are your father's heartbeat. And I am here for you, always. And to Malcolm, my dear son, I will see you again. Until then, keep watching over us. With all the love I never got to say aloud. Phylicia Rashad. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like this video to honor Malcolm-Jamal Warner's incredible life and the love Phylicia Rashad so bravely shared. Subscribe to our channel for more videos that deserve to be remembered forever. Comment below with your favorite memory of Malcolm. Thank you for being here. We remember. We grieve. We honor. Together.